Good afternoon and welcome to issue number 50. Quite a milestone around here. We're pretty excited about it. And today's topic is quite a milestone as well. Today's topic is forensic DNA interpretation. Well, what does that mean? So I've spent the last 3 years of my professional life studying to get a master's degree in DNA and serology. And as of last week, I have been qualified in a Louisiana District Court as an expert in forensic DNA interpretation. Now, what does that mean? That means that I am an expert in taking the raw data, the data produced by a state police crime lab or any crime lab for that matter, and analyzing that data, interpreting the data, and then making sure that the data as it's being reported, the results as being reported by the crime lab are accurate as to the data, right? That the data itself supports the results. And that the state police crime lab or the whatever crime lab is last week it was the state police crime lab, whatever crime lab is reporting the results, that they do so in a way consistent with their own protocols, their own quality assurance, and to make sure that whatever they're reporting also agrees with the science, right? That they can support their conclusions with science, not just with these conclusory type statements, that this is the way that it is because I say it's the way that it is. So here's my experience. My experience with forensic DNA analysts is that they are so rarely challenged in their environment that they actually get frustrated and angry when you challenge them, when you ask them about the science, when you ask them not even really difficult questions, right? They should be answered. If you're an expert in forensic DNA analysis and testing, you should be able to take the stand and answer all the questions, right? All the reasonable scientific questions related to the testing you're doing. Let's be really clear about that. But I don't get up there and try to trick them, right? I've had many of them on cross-examination on many occasions, and I'm not trying to trick anybody. I'm just asking important questions related to the results. And I get a lot of pushback, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of, well, I've just been doing it for a long time, so I know the answer. And a lot of, well, I don't know how to support that by the science. And it's been in the past, what I would do as an attorney is I would cross-examine that expert by saying, all right, well, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to take a look at the textbook, or we're going to take a look at this journal article, or we're going to take a look at this learned treatise, and we're going to examine the science behind what it is you're claiming, and we're going to talk about why your claim doesn't match the science, or why the science undermines the strength of the claim that you're trying to say. So you're putting forth this statement that is like fantastic, right? Your client can't be excluded on the order of 1 in 307 quintillion, whatever. I get it that you think that it's like the word of God and it's an infallible piece of evidence. But the truth is that that's not the way that science works, right? That's not the way experiments work. There are error rates, there are mistakes, there are ranges of answers, right? And so what we do as a forensics DNA interpretation expert is I make sure that we talk about DNA in a realistic view, right? That DNA is measured by the jury in the proper weight. That it's just another piece of evidence in the entire trial, then it should be measured within the context of all of the other evidence in trial. So listen, and here's the key, right? So if the prosecution walks up, 5, 6, 7, 8 witnesses, and all those witnesses say, that guy had a gun in his hand and he pointed it at him and he pulled the trigger and it shot him and killed him. And then they march somebody up there for DNA analysis, and the DNA analysis says, well, there's his DNA on the gun. It's the only DNA on the gun, and it's to this degree of certainty. So in that case, DNA is important, but it's not the whole case, right? And so even if that DNA evidence was weaker, and we could talk about exactly how that should be weighed within the rest of the evidence, with all those other witnesses, and maybe there's a video, and maybe the guy confessed, well, then the DNA is not playing a role, right? And so even measured in its proper weight, right? Even if it was a partial profile, you would still think, well, the DNA has been measured properly and the proper outcome was more than likely to convict this person, right? Okay, so let's think about it in the other way. The DA has no witnesses. The DA has no video. The DA has no confession. There's a single person who saw the events and then a deceased person, right? Or there's a single person, an unknown person that no one knows, and the deceased. And they find a gun on the ground and they swab it. And that DNA on that swab is a partial profile that partially matches someone that they can put a finger on. Can't tell you where he was, can't tell you what he was doing. He doesn't have some rock solid alibi. Maybe it was 3:30 in the morning and he was sleeping. And now the DNA is everything the case is. is the entire case is based on a DNA result. I've seen this. I've been in the courtroom in a case like this. And when a jury gets told about this partial profile, and the DNA analyst gets on the stand and starts talking about these fantastically large numbers, even on a partial, non-full profile, DNA is then weighed as though it's the Word of God, as though it's just the absolute, undeniable, uncontrovertible truth. And a state police crime lab employee will oftentimes, the state police here and some of the other labs in Louisiana, will oftentimes present that evidence in a way that makes it sound like it's uncontrovertible. That is no way you could challenge that. But there is. And that DNA should be measured in a very specific way. It should be given the proper weight. We should be able to teach the jury enough DNA science to understand that it's uncertain, that there's an uncertainty to a partial profile. There's an uncertainty to DNA gathered off the surface of a weapon, or off the surface of a car, or off the surface of a door sill or a door handle, that there's some uncertainty there, and that uncertainty should be measured. It should be weighed. That doesn't mean that a DNA expert from any side of the game can walk in and say, well, because it was a half partial profile and it was just a little bit of DNA, then this defendant is definitely innocent. That's just foolishness, right? That's nonsense. So what we're there to do is to make sure that the jury gets the real weight of the evidence and the real strength of it, right? Like, what is it? How strong is this DNA? How strong is this profile? How strong is this evidence? And that's very, very important. Well, that story can be told with the data. That story can be told with the quantification and how much DNA started. That story can be told with the nature of the profile. And is it a full profile? Is it a partial profile? How much? Is it a mixed sample? Is it really 2 contributors? Is it 1 contributor? Is it 3 or more contributors? Is it an ultra complex, multi-person profile where the possible defendant could fit in by happenstance alone? And that's possible. That's distinctly possible. In some circumstances with DNA mixtures of 3, 4, 5 people, to then make a statistical analysis about one of them is foolishness. This is not supported in the science, and it's quite frankly not supported in the protocols for the state of Louisiana, in any of the forensic DNA labs in the state of Louisiana. And so, but those matters are being reported in court in a way that sounds infallible, and being reported in a way that's both not a lie, not a complete fabrication, but also not a whole truth. Because the DNA scientists at the labs know that an attorney is not capable of hearing the half-truth and challenging it. And that's what's going on. That's what's happening in courtrooms across the state of Louisiana. People are being convicted with half-truths. People are being convicted with partial stories, with not the whole bit of information about DNA and forensic science evidence in general, but specifically for my purposes, DNA. And so that's what we're here to do. We are here to tell the truth. We're here to tell the story. And so when I took the stand last week and I talked about the DNA in that particular case, I didn't get up and just say a bunch of things. I didn't get up and just make a bunch of statements about the DNA. What I did was I made a statement and then I pointed to the textbook where it was. Or I made a statement and I pointed to the study on my desk right in front of me, what that came out of. And I talked about the study and I talked about the text and I talked about what was going on. I talked about the science so that the testimony can be measured on the strength of the science. On the strength of the science itself, and not on the strength of some statement made by a clearly biased individual. The head of the forensic DNA unit at the State Police Crime Lab took the stand last week and said in open court that she would be there whether she was paid or not. That she would be in that courtroom, even if she wasn't getting paid at all, she would be in that courtroom for rebuttal of the testimony that I gave. Well, that's just nonsense. That's complete and utter nonsense. People go to work to make money. And I don't care how much you like your job, you go to work to make money. That's what you do. That's why people work. And if she's willing to come in there and testify and drive from Baton Rouge to Clinton, Louisiana and testify for no money at all, and she's willing to say that, and that's completely not true, well, then she's willing to say anything. Anything to support the state. She's willing to say whatever it takes for the state to get it. their conviction, because the state police crime lab employees are state police employees paid by the state police. And that's serious. You know, the prosecutor wanted to challenge me on the fact that I was being paid. And I said, yes, of course I'm being paid. I'm in the business to make money. I have 6 children. I have a house. I have a car note. I have employees who have children who rely on me to pay them. Of course I'm being paid. And I'm not being paid to lie, because I can't take the stand and lie. I can't take the stand and make things up. I can't take the stand and fabricate information, because all you would have to do is get that transcript, and every time I took the stand again, you'd be like, hey, didn't you lie this last time you were on the stand? Hey, didn't you lie this last time you were on the stand? It's foolishness. And so that's where we are. We are in a place now where the state police crime lab folks have to be challenged. They have to be challenged on what they're reporting. They have to be challenged on the nature of the results in the DNA lab. They have to be challenged on the interpretation of the data they're producing, and they have to be held to account. And that's why we're here. I'm here for that purpose, to hold them to account. And so my services are both, it really exist in 2 ways, right? As co-counsel, so not to mention my own clients, my own DNA clients, my own interpretation of my clients' own results, but also being hired by other attorneys to come in as co-counsel to cross-examine the state's expert and or direct examine a defense expert, and to cross-examine the state's expert with the knowledge of being an expert myself, so that they can't get away with saying just whatever it is they want to say. They can't just make these like crazy statements about things and not say, well, wait a second, where's your scientific support for that statement? Where's your scientific support for that conclusion? What's the scientific support for that result? And it's been my experience that up to now, the State Police Crime Lab people have been capable of answering those questions with any reasonableness, right? With any reasonable pointing to the science and saying, here's the science behind it. Here's the biology. Here's the biochemistry behind what I'm saying. Here's the science that supports my assertion. Now, let's hope they do going forward. Let's hope they get it now that that there's a qualified expert here locally who's willing to challenge them, so that they learn the science and so that they report accurate results and report results that are meaningful within the science and not overstating or half-truths or not telling the whole story about DNA. Isn't that the point? Because we strengthen each other. We strengthen each other as a criminal justice system. Accountability is an incredible tool for sharpening the stone, for sharpening what it is we do as a system on the whole. And so that's why I'm here, to be hired as co-counsel in a case to cross-examine the state's expert, or to be hired as an expert to take the stand and talk about the interpretation of DNA results inside that environment, in contravention of what the state has to say when it's that way, when that's the case. I'll tell you now that I've had many DNA cases where I've read the DNA and it was terrible. It was terrible. It was really bad for my client. I had to go to the client and say, look, I'm really good at this DNA stuff. At the time, I wasn't yet qualified as an expert. And I said, really good at this DNA stuff. Man, the evidence is terrible. It's terrible. Your DNA is, it's you, man. Let's talk about pleading this. This is nuts. You can't challenge this. This is terrible. And so that exists, right? It's not like I'm some hired gun that's going to go in and make up some nonsense, right? To go in and say, oh, well, all the DNA testing in the world is terrible. It's just foolishness, right? What we're talking about are those cases where there's trace DNA, or there's a very small amount of starting DNA, or where there's mixtures of multiple people, 2, 3, 4, even more people in a single DNA profile, and convoluting that profile into a single profile that you can make a statement about, or taking just a handful of DNA cells, 10, 15, 20 cells per microliter, and taking those and multiplying those in 32 exponential cycles until you get millions of copies with millions of errors at times, and partial profiles and not full profiles. And you take those cases and you make definitive statements about those cases as though it were a blood sample or a cheek swab. Because all DNA is not created equal. And that's why we're here. We're here to equalize the playing field. We're here to make the system fair. We're here to hold the crime labs to account on what they say in the courtroom, what they report to a jury, what their interpretation is, what is the meaningful interpretation and reporting of DNA evidence in the courtroom, so that juries can get the proper weight, the proper strength of the evidence against defendants, against citizens, against those people who deserve due process prior to having their liberty taken away from them. So that's why we're here, here at the Ambo Law Firm. And that's it. That's my piece on expert forensic DNA interpretation and what I can do in 15 minutes. If you're interested in that, you're more than welcome to send me some contact information, or say hello, or shoot me your information so that I can respond to you in terms of what we can or cannot do for you in your particular case, if you're an attorney and you're watching this. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.